The forests in eastern North America are reeling from a 1-2 punch. Recently, the emerald ash borer, Agralis planipennis, wiped out hundreds of millions of ash trees. The mortality rate is essentially 100%, except for those few specimens that homeowners have treated with expensive insecticide infusions pumped under the bark of select trees. If you know of a lone ash that's still standing, it's only a matter of time before it succumbs to the internal girdling caused by the emerald ash borer larvae eating pathways through the inner bark. Now, foresters are projecting the elimination of the beech tree, Fagus grandifolia, from beech leaf disease, or BLD. The invasive pest is a microscopic worm, or nematode, with the scientific name Lidolenchus crenate, subspecies McKennii. The nematode has been found from Ohio to Connecticut and from New Jersey to Ontario. In one scientific study by Sharon Reed and her colleagues, the research team found thousands of nematodes present in leaf samples they took. The worms can overwinter in the fallen leaf matter that's protected from desiccation under snow and ice, even in temperatures of 26 degrees below Celsius or 15 below Fahrenheit. On a mildly positive note, I found a news item released by the University of Rhode Island dated June 2nd, 2022 that suggests researchers in Ohio have some positive results in treating beech trees with a diluted solution of phosphite, which is a fungicide commonly used on various food crops. I have ordered some and will begin treatment on some of my infected beech trees, but of course it is too soon to tell, and there are several hundred beech trees in the forests around me. Unfortunately, we have seen these types of losses before. Chestnut trees, which once made up 50% of eastern hardwood forests, were decimated by the chestnut blight fungus. Billions of trees were lost, along with the nuts that fed countless animals, to say nothing of the beautiful hardwood that made the trees so valuable to furniture makers, from cradle to grave, or I should say from cradle to coffin. More recently, American elms have nearly been eliminated from the landscape by Dutch elm disease, which is caused by a parasitic fungi first observed on elms in the Netherlands. The tree's vascular system circulates sticky spores, which beetles then spread from tree to tree. A New York Times article in 1989 reported that of the nearly 77 million elms that had been alive in the U.S., only a few million survived. Can we save the forests? Perhaps. For those species that still have a fighting chance, which in my New Jersey woodlands include oaks, maples, poplars, hickory, black birch, dogwood, cedars, and the like, one of the greatest threats comes from the overpopulation of white-tailed deer. Without protection in the form of deer exclosures, there will be no forest regeneration when all the beech trees are gone. Deer are voracious browsers, the rural equivalent of urban rats, and able to thrive in edge habitat created by humans. They will eat any seedling that pokes up from the forest floor. Other than invasives such as barberry and autumn olives, and those plants that develop toxins for protection such as cohosh and mayapples, everything else is food for a deer. Where I have removed invasives, the forest floor is virtually barren. The rest of this video is a how-to on building a deer exclosure, the only method I've found to save the future forest. Over the years, I've learned by trial and error what works best, naively starting with string, fishing line, and sapling posts, moving to 2x4 set in concrete that held thin plastic netting, and finally moving to 6-foot rolls of welded wire tied to 8-foot metal T-posts. The string and fishing line were just stupid. The netting on wooden posts eventually got ripped through or plowed over, because deer will turn into bulldozers when they are hungry. The wire, however, is a solid barrier that requires very little maintenance. The point I hope to make is that you don't need to hire a landscaping firm to sink scores of heavy-duty posts and lay thousands of feet of wire. One person, working by him or herself, can erect an exclosure that can protect small island habitats within a larger woodland. Here's what you'll need. One roll of 6-foot high, 100-foot length of welded wire, maybe $175, 10 8-foot metal T-stakes, one package of 6-inch plastic ratchet ties or lengths of wire cut to use as ties, a box of 1.5-inch galvanized fence staples, and heavy-duty work gloves to protect your hands. The tools you'll need are a wheelbarrow or some sort of hand truck to transport the roll of wire, a 6-foot step ladder, a metal bar that you can use to create the holes for the stakes, a sledgehammer to pound those stakes in, a level to make sure you've set the stakes without looking too drunken, a hammer to drive fence staples into trees if you choose to use trees as posts, ear protection because it's deafening when you're pounding those stakes, and heavy-duty pliers capable of cutting the welded wire. Finding a good site for your exclosure is an important first step in the process. I live on a wooded plot of 8 acres, so I have several deer exclosures built over a number of years surrounding the house. But there may be islands of opportunity deeper in the woods. Several years ago, I had a woodcutter drop a number of dead oaks in one concentrated area of the forest. Yet another assault on the woods that began killing off various oaks I won't get into. I took some of the timber for firewood, but I left much of the dropped trees on the ground to slowly rot back into the soil, not to mention hold moisture on the ground and provide habitat for countless species. The gap in the canopy created by the loss of a half-dozen 100-year-old trees is exactly what the next generation of forests needs: sunlight. That's a great place to put an exclosure. As you can see in this exclosure, I use several mature trees as major fence posts. Also, I let the canopy gap determine the size of the exclosure. So when I ran out of welded wire, I used the poor man's substitute of chicken wire to finish off the circle. I'm sure that will need maintenance sooner rather than later, but at least it filled the gap. Welded wire is pretty firm, so you don't have to be meticulous about the distance between stakes or tree trunks. This span is 11 feet. This one is 14 feet. So if your post hole bar hits a large rock or root, try someplace else close by. Sink your bar to create a hole a couple of feet deep. Set the stake in the hole, get up on the step ladder and start pounding. Every now and then put your level against the stake to make sure it's roughly straight. I take pride in being able to do a job by myself and have gone to elaborate means to make stringing the fence easier on my aging body. This included designing a fence roller outer that started out about as successfully as my string and fishing line exclosures. But if you're not a die-hard do-it-yourselfer, having a helper or two unroll and hold the wire up will make this chore a lot easier. I often use a rock or my foot to hold the unrolled wire about 6 inches off the ground when attaching it to the stakes. You want turtles, foxes, small animals to be able to move underneath the wiring, and blowing leaves will pile up if the fencing is too low. But you don't want it so high that fawns or bigger deer can push underneath, get inside, and destroy everything you're trying to protect. As you think through the placement of stakes and the use of existing trees, remember to create a space for a gate. I have created several gate types. The easiest is to set 2 stakes 4 or 5 feet apart that will come at the end of the roll of wire. When you get to the end, simply put a couple of strands of wire to secure the gate shut, untie the strands and pull the fence back a little to head in and inspect what is growing in your exclosure. You can also cut off a segment of fencing and essentially hang it on nails driven into trees that are not too far apart. And of course, you can get as creative as you want, as you can see from these gates made of old mountain laurel trunks. Over the years, you will be delighted with what starts to grow in your exclosure. My advice is to be a woodland gardener. The indiscriminate munching the deer do in the forest actually keeps 1,000 maple or poplar or black birch seedlings from choking each other out. Being more discriminating, a good woodland steward will weed his or her exclosure. Select for the species you want to encourage. I pull the poplars, the black birch, in favor of oaks that are sprouting. I also transplant species I'd like to give a chance to, including mountain laurels, white spruce, which an earlier owner of the property introduced back in the 1970s, blueberries, hollies. If two specimens are too close, yank one of them up. Stewarding your exclosure also means you will need to pull out invasives. Around here, that includes garlic mustard, stiltgrass, mugwort, barberry, knotweed, oriental bittersweet, burning bush, and ailanthus. You should also watch for natives that may be undesirable. I pull poison ivy and grapevines. I love the wild grapes, but they provide habitat for the spotted lanternfly, yet one more scourge inflicting the Northeast. I don't hold out much hope that the beech trees will survive. I fear they will go the way of the chestnut, the elm, and the ash. But amid the constant onslaught of perils, worsened by the introduction of exotic species spread by international trade and a warming planet beset by new levels of drought and flood and fire, stewarding islands in the forest feels like a positive accomplishment. When it seems as if the sky is falling, I'm able to go out and do some weeding in the woods. I think it gives me some resilience for whatever the next challenge is. I'm Chris Teasdale, and this is a Solo Hand production.